And indeed, this year already, we've seen one of the most defining issues playing out, which is the debt exchange program. And it has been a battle. It's been going on for weeks now, and there's no end in sight. There's been the latest extension we know, but the inclusion of individual bondholders, I guess, is the biggest threat of all. And we've seen now forcing the finance minister to ask for a meeting. Today, there was a very fruitful meeting from everybody else who was involved in it, particularly the leadership of the Individual Bondholders Forum, the Individual Bondholders Association of Ghana, and the Pensioners Individual Bondholders Forum. Three of them all sitting around the table with the finance minister to discuss the issues. And you've seen the advocacy that they've been waging for real lives that may suffer great peril if it goes ahead. And that is really defining this year going forward. The finance ministry and the government needs to close this deal so they can get an IMF executive board approval. But in doing so, there's a significant risk. And tonight, we've examined so many things when it comes to this debt exchange program. This is the first time this country is doing so. But one of the things that jumps at you, and you cannot ignore it, it is the political cost. The political cost of what is happening currently is one that myself and my team have been thinking about, and we thought, let's give it a shot. Let's try and discuss it a bit more and see, because remember that next year is an election year, and what is happening right now will define the next decade, the next generation, and the political cost will be very severe. We took a cue from a stalwart of the MPP, a cabinet minister, the man who leads the MPP in Parliament, Evans Mensah, who made some profound pronouncements in Parliament when the leadership of the individual bondholders paid him a visit. These are his words, but watch what he said from the horse's own mouth.
Nothing can substitute for discussions, roundtable discussions and engagements, wherever we find ourselves in. I think it's important that we still go back to the drawing table to have engagement with the major stakeholders. As he said, all of us are in it. And if we don't manage well, we've gone through this before, way back some 25, 30 years ago. And repositioning was a major difficulty. Today, many people are coming on board. And if this thing should happen, how do we build confidence and trust in reconstructing a new savings culture? And it's like, really, many of what we are talking about, many of these holders also belong to the middle class. And that's where the major worry is. If we are wiping away the middle class, that's going to be dangerous. That's going to be dangerous. So we need to have some further dialogue on this.
If you are wiping away the middle class, that is going to be dangerous. That, he says, will be dangerous. The middle class, that is the magic operative word here, middle class. And he drills this down so perfectly. And he says many of the bondholders, the individual bondholders, belong to the middle class. Now, why is he pointing? He's pointing at something that is critical to winning or losing an election in Ghana. The middle class typically are those people we call the floating voters. They decide this country's election. They are the kingmakers in this country. As for the core base of the two parties, the NDC and the MPP, it's set. If you put a donkey in the colors of the MPP and the NDC, that person may possibly win elections, right? It's not that they're mindless. It is just an attachment to the party that they hold on to dearly. They believe in that. You can't fault them for it. But that middle class, that floating voter, the man or woman who can read between the lines, they listen and they pay attention to what you're saying, and they float between one election to the next. They may not vote for you in the next elections, but they decide not to vote at all. And that in itself is a decision that can cost you an election. That is what Evans Mensah, the majority leader, is pointing at. And you cannot help but, put a bit together and try to analyze and see what he's trying to say and why he was backing an exemption for the individual bondholders, because he appreciates the political cost of wiping out that middle class. Many of them, he says, are individual bondholders. Who will decide where the pendulum swings in 2024? Now, what are the numbers we are talking about? Currently, if you go to just one of the forums, the Individual Bondholders Forum, we're talking about more than 100,000 people who have signed on to join this fight to say exempt our individual bonds. 100,000 people. I'll illustrate for you that in this country, parties have lost elections with far less number of people. This number, far less number of people have decided an election in this country. And so it is critical, 100,000. So the Individual Bondholders Forum alone can decide the next elections. I will demonstrate, going into our electoral history for you, that this number can be very critical in elections that we are approaching in the 2024 elections. But that is just one forum. Remember that there are 3 forums already. If you put their numbers together, and this is those who have registered, right? If you put their numbers together, we're talking about 1.3 million individual bondholders. That is way above what can decide an election. And as Evans Mensah says, many of these people are the middle class. They are the floating voters. They are the people who decide the elections, the kingmakers. So the numbers are important. Now let's look at the electoral history to tell the story. I told you about the 100,000 who have just signed on and registered on the website of the Individual Bondholders Forum, the Individual Bondholders Forum, the IBF. If you go to 2008 runoff, it was decided by 84,000 votes. In fact, it's even less than that. So those 100,000 people, and normally in the 8th year of a government, the final term of a political party in power, you tend to have runoffs. You tend to have runoff. We've seen 2000, we've seen 2008. We're going to see another one, right, play out. And in those runoffs, in those years, in those 8th years, right, the last term of a party, we also tend to have runoffs. And so it's not far-fetched to assume and to predict that we possibly will have a very close race. And the 100,000 members of the Individual Bondholders Forum, led by Martin Kpebu, Thomas Menu, Franklin Kujo, etc., can decide next year's elections. Evans Mensah's warning exactly is that. That's what he was drilling at. And then look at that. Look at that, the margins of victory. Well, 600,000. I mean, you look at 2016 and 2000 runoff, they are a bit of an outlier in terms of the significant margins. But then you're in the 5,000. If you look at the averages over the period, it's 500,000. And so we are talking about 1.3 million people affected, many of them middle-class voters. So we are playing with huge votes here, 1.3 million. And don't only think about this number, because these people have dependents. So you're doing a multiplier effect. You are in possibly 6 million people, if you're looking at one household of 6 people. So that clearly is a big deal. And no wonder the finance minister is beginning to say, I'm ready to change stuff, right? Because and have you heard the story about the general secretary of the party and other leaders of the NPP meeting with the finance ministry officials and the finance minister himself, asking him to reconsider? Have you heard about the majority chief whip, Arnaud Dompré himself, asking his own government to reconsider inclusion of individual bondholders? There is a lot at stake. It is the survival, the very survival of this party is at stake here. What is happening? Now, the more reason why the MPP seem to now be backed into a corner, and for the party folks, they are dead worried. Evans Mensah in particular has told us that. Because if you look at the nature of the MPP, they call themselves property owning. They're a property owning party. And that is why Evans Mensah was making the point that, listen, those people that you are playing with, that you claim you want to take their bonds away, Those are the middle-class boys. Those are the people who represent. They are the very representation of the property-owning part of the population, that demographic in this. And those are the people who traditionally the MPP say they want to appeal to because they are largely an elitist political party. In contrast, the NDC is not. It is a Congress. And if you read that very voluminous book that we brought to you the last time we covered the NDC's Congress, the party itself says they chose Congress because for them, they don't define themselves as elitists or property owning, right? They define themselves as the party that brings everybody together. You know, the wache seller, the man who cleans the toilet, the janitor, everybody comes together to form a Congress. So they are different. So they would be appealing to the masses and the villages, etc., because that's really where their base is, right? A people's party. And again, the pillars are jobs, education, social intervention, because it's a social democratic party. The NDC, the MPP hasn't got a luxury to be touching individual bondholders. I know the economy is at stake, but listen, the politics also, there are votes involved. And no wonder the story has emerged of the party's leadership in the MPP attempting to convince Ken Ofori-Atta, please back off. Because next year, we're already having a tough time already convincing people in the current economic condition to vote for us. And then you're touching our core base, property owning. So James Abongsu was onto something here. And then, of course, we're trying to now put our finger on, if you're trying to look at the middle class, what is the percentage of the population that you can say are middle class? Now, if you look at the African Development Bank's 2013 report, it says in Ghana we have 46% of Ghanaians are in that middle class area. 46% of them. If you do the permutations according to the 2021 population housing census, you're talking about 14.12 million people are, right? That is our estimate based on this. This is 2013, so let's take on the face value for a second. It could be more, it could be less, right? But if you're using the permutations against the population housing census, 14.12% million people. That is a huge number. Even if you have 1% of this, 2-5% of this affected by this current, individual bonds included in the generality of those who are holding these individual bonds, as James Abongsu warns, as a party, you are in trouble. I'm going to bring in my guest after this break. I want them to give me their own understanding of what this political cost of what is happening could be. And I'm really delighted because we have a cross-section of panelists who know their stuff. Of course, you have Dr. Tio Champon, who is a political risk analyst and economist himself. So you can balance both. And then, of course, we have Dr. Evans Mensah and Asa Sante also joining me for a conversation on this. Stay with me here on PM Express.